This is the I Heart My Life show. Ashley, welcome to the I Heart My Life show. I am pumped for this episode. I have a whole page of notes because I've listened to multiple interviews that you've done before and have been so inspired by your story. And I'm thrilled to bring it to my community because I know it's going to change lives and just support so many people in various stages of growth, in expanding, making decisions, and taking action. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I almost felt myself being self-conscious. I'm like, am I interesting on these podcasts? So many of them, but I do have a lot to say. Thank you for bringing me here.
Yeah, no, it's my honor. And honestly, we could spend the entire time just dissecting your story. So I definitely want to start there. But I also know that you're doing such incredible work in the world around the TEDx space. And so we'll dive into that as well for anyone who's interested in learning about TED and that whole world. But first, I want to go back kind of in the archives and talk a little bit about your journey. And I know that you've gone from counterterrorism to creating millions in a very short period of time in the online space with courses, to losing all of that and being over 500K in debt, to starting this new business after going through a massive transformation and 4 year kind of U-turn. And so I want to dive into where that all began, especially with the work in counterterrorism, because I think there's so many things that people can learn about that part of the journey, and I want to pull out some nuggets as we dive into that. So, can you take us back to that time and talk about how you actually landed that opportunity?
I don't even know if I landed the opportunity. I feel like I really pushed hard and created the opportunity, just like everybody, right? I just poured myself into national security because in college I remember having to choose a major and feeling like I don't even know. First of all, I mean, all the research shows our brains not formed till we're 26. So I feel like how are we supposed to be making decisions about our career at 18, And there's also a lot of research that indicates we don't really use our majors. I think it's 17 to 27% is the variety of statistics I've seen of people using their college major, in their job. And so I don't know. I feel like we do feel some sense of pressure when we're young. And then we have to figure out how to show up with that and how to choose a career with that. And how do you know who you are in your work if you've never really worked, right? My first job was at a preschool. And I will say this, I was like the assistant to the chef and helping the little kids get their meals at the preschool. And I would always notice typos in the marketing materials or like grammatical errors because I was always pretty good at English and writing. And I would bring it to the front desk. I was like 15, with my permit driving. And I would be like, "Hey, you gotta fix this sentence." And eventually they noticed that. And that's what I learned about your actual career path and skill set is that it kind of bleeds into your life and your history. And you just need to be willing to pay attention to it because, what's obvious for you is not so obvious for other people. And so they used to call me the eagle eye. And so even when I was like 15, like there was something with words and writing, and I didn't fully notice it. But the way that I understood it when I got to college was wow, I'm really good at people and talking and like making things happen because of words. That's all I got. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be a spy. And that sounds like a big leap, but I grew up in a house with a dad who like really loved talking about politics and he had the news on every morning. And even as an adult, I don't really like the news. I mean, obviously we have responsibility to watch it or we don't. I don't know. It's a personal matter of opinion, but for a long time in my 30s, I would put the news on because it felt self-soothing, like, it felt like my childhood just putting the news on. So I did everything I could. I went to graduate school. I spoke Spanish by the time I was 5, which I've lost most of it. Became fluent in French by the time I was, like, I wanna say done with middle school, high school, and the fluency really cemented in college, and that opened me up to studying North Africa, the French language in different parts of North Africa, and then that moved me into Arabic, and I went to King's College in London. I know you spent quite a bit of time in London. The Department of War, I studied, and I just planned to join the CIA, and I thought, "You know what? I can use my ability to have a conversation to change people's lives." And there's so much I didn't know at the time, right? Like, uh, how would I feel about manipulating people so that they would share with me for the greater good, in my opinion, right? The greater good's so subjective. How would my nervous system regulate putting myself in those situations? So there's so much I didn't know about myself, and I worked hard enough to get to that career path. And as I was at the Pentagon in national security, and I finally got there from doing all the things, doing the internship, I remember in London, I worked for the law firm that represented Princess Diana. I was like an intern on a human rights project. And they gave me this huge stack of paper the first day. And I was like, I don't even know how old you are when you go to grad school anymore. I can't remember. But I just remember seeing this stack of paper, calling my mom crying, like, they want me to know all 300 pages of this in 2 days. And I'm a grad student. And like, how am I supposed to? And now to this day, it just shows you what aging does. There's so many mistakes I made in my 20s, and people always say, "Oh, you'll learn from your mistakes." And it's like the worst feeling when you're in it. And then when you're like in your later 30s, maybe early 40s, I feel like there's so many moments I'm having now that are reference points. My team will call me and say, "Hey, should we do this or that with our ads?" I'm like, "Oh, definitely don't go that route because there's 4 legal issues with that people don't realize." I'm so much wiser. I had no idea. And so back when I was in national security, I ended up just not knowing all these things about myself and not having that wisdom. And so I just dove in and I ended up getting a TED Talk opportunity. I won an award and it totally changed my life to get this TEDx talk. It was at Berkeley. It was one of the biggest TEDx events, which a lot of people don't know the difference between TED and TEDx. So just a quick thought on that. TED is the main brand. It's pretty much invite only. That's why you see like Elon Musk on stage for TED. You can pitch yourself to get on it, but I don't know if it's a worthy pursuit. And then TEDx is a license from the TED brand. There's 13,000 of them around the world, maybe 1 or 2,000 active anytime. And you can submit yourself to be on the TEDx stage. It's a lot of work. Our team at my agency now, Wise Whisper, they spend anywhere from 100 to 200 plus hours getting our clients booked on stage. We pretty much don't stop pitching clients until they get booked on stage. And we have a Rolodex of people we know. So it's a project, but it's a license, so basically anyone can decide to host a TEDx event. It can cost up to probably $100,000 in sponsor money you need to, like, put it together, but once you get the approval, your TEDx event is happening, and there's 40 million TEDx followers on YouTube, and same with TED. So, the thing that a lot of consumers don't notice is the difference between TED or TEDx. They hold the brand the same. And so you have way bigger opportunity on the TEDx stage. And another thing is a lot of entrepreneurs who are high achievers, they say, well, how do I get the best TEDx? Because Wise Whisper Agency is booking and writing TEDx talks, or we've booked and written more than 100 of them. And people will say, well, how do I get the best TEDx stage? I'm like, there is no best. As long as the audio works and your thing gets on YouTube, it's doing what it needs to do. And so, yeah, I ended up getting this TEDx opportunity when I was like 23. This girl at this awards thing offered it to me, and I couldn't believe it. And I was in Istanbul and I was in this protest situation. I got a text message from this girl, I referred you for a TED Talk, TEDx. And I got this email from them. Can you send your speaking reel? Didn't have a speaking reel. And I think this is something I talked to our friend Hannah Nieves about, how I just literally put the curtain from the shower in the hotel room behind me and propped my iPhone 2 or whatever it was in 2012 against the wall, and I started talking at the phone, and I sent them this weird video of me. And I somehow got this talk, and I was working in Obama administration by that point, so I ended up asking a speechwriter in the administration, "Can you help me?" They gave me an outline for how to write TEDx talks, and here I am 10 to 15 years later. I have my agency, Wise Whisper, because I've now given 2 TEDx talks, both have gone viral. The first one that I gave went viral, and I'm kind of embarrassed by that because it's not my best work because it was my first try, but I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful for the impact it's had on my life. Nothing has influenced my opportunities like this TEDx talk. The amount of revenue I've made is in the millions from people who have applied to work with me through TEDx because they found me there. The amount of book sales, podcast listenership, it's really just mind blowing what happens when you do one of these and it does well. And I tell people all the time, especially people who come into my company, they're clients that are saying they want to book and write their signature talk. I'm like, look, not everybody goes viral, but you kind of can know if you will. Because if you're deeply moved and you're giving really original content, so it's written powerfully, and you practice your face off, you memorize every word, and then you improv it, you're in a really good spot. And people don't realize great speakers are actors more than they're writers. So that's my hugely long answer to how I got here.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I know I've heard you say a couple of times that it's not easy, but there's a simple process that people can follow. So we'll talk about that in just a second. The thing I want to come back to that's really stood out to me about your story since I heard you share it for the first time a few months ago on another podcast was you mentioned that you got your Pentagon job through, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, through a lot of effort and through putting yourself out there and essentially calling thousands of different people who had gotten, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but who had gotten jobs after they went through the program you went through to see how you could do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that number in that story has really stood out to me because so many of us, whether we're in the online space or somewhere else, we forget about the kind of determination and the effort that it takes to make things happen. And we want things to happen like that. We want it to fall into our lap. So, can you talk a little bit about that experience and where you think that tenacity and that drive came from for you?
Yeah. I actually have reflected a lot on my urgency in my life. I think all of us are motivated by different things. I grew up in a sense of urgency, and I think a lot of people don't have this. And it's to me, latency, especially in business, is so important. If you have a customer issue and you take a long time to respond, it gets way bigger, right? But if you respond right away, like before it even takes off, it doesn't exist. And I look for that in that talent I hire at Wise Whisper Agency. And I don't want to be somebody that burns anybody out, right? I look for people who have a natural urgency. And my urgency obviously comes from an inspired place just as much as of a wounded one, right? I think growing up in a house with a dad who lost everything when the dot-com boom was happening, we lost our home. We almost claimed bankruptcy. And I just remember that time very vividly. And I think this urgency was created in me of, wow, this is so not fun to see my family in pain. I better get successful quick, you know? And it's a core value thing. Like I value fun, I value freedom. And, people talk all the time about how discipline is freedom. Some people think it's freedom to have the cupcake, and I do too. But if you have too many cupcakes, you're going to be imprisoned by your own body. You're going to feel sick, right? So I think that pain growing up gave me that discipline. And I would argue for anybody listening, sometimes you just don't have a vision that pulls you forward. And I think there's a couple things to look at with that in business and in personal. Like, I really struggled in my career when I didn't want to be there, right? If I was doing something I didn't want to do. And I think it's human nature to navigate two feelings, right? One feeling is the fear of the unknown. And then another feeling is how miserable you are in your current situation, right? Most people are not willing to leap into the fear of the unknown until they are so freaking miserable that it's like, who cares anymore? And so I've really tried to notice when I'm lukewarm. I think in personal development, there's a lot of best self stuff that's really cool. But I also think sometimes it's not about being your best self. It's about accepting yourself. It's not about trying to be better at anything. So in my case, in my career, in my vision, there was probably 4 years, very full years, where I didn't love what I was doing. So I had a career coaching business for 12 years. The last 4 years, I was complete with career coaching. But I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And so I career coached people because I was good at it, but it truly felt like something that I was paying the bills really well with, but I wasn't wanting to do. And then for a while, I judged myself for that. Oh man, these people are coming in. And I just goes, well, if you have a doctor and he's like the best surgeon, but he doesn't really like being a surgeon anymore, I don't care. As long as he's a good surgeon, he's in integrity with me. So I kind of just thought, okay, like I'm in integrity, I'll do this. And I'm really grateful for the part of myself that was willing to kind of eat shit for 4 years as far as not loving what I want to do because I didn't tax myself elsewhere. I put in the minimum amount of hours to live my life. My career didn't take up a lot of space, so I had a lot of fun outside of it. And I just let it be the thing that paid the bills for 4 years. And I showed up fully for my clients with full presence and expertise. And then this idea to write and book TEDx talks for people dropped into my field. And for about 2 years, I told my career coaching clients, hey, look, these TED Talks are wild. You really need to do one. I got a speaking agent. I went on a speaking tour. My keynote fees went from 5K to 30K. It's all this TED Talk. Let's do it. So I would tell them, use however many of these career coaching sessions in your package you want to use on a TED Talk. I'll refer you to somebody that can book you. And when I saw the booker book 39 out of 40 people, and the one person she couldn't book was this Italian woman that her English just wasn't there enough to understand her talk. That was when I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to put this offer together. And at first I thought it would be a coaching offer. So 2 years in, I was just like referring people to this woman, seeing them get booked, being like, awesome, glad that worked out for you. And then the next 2 years, I started thinking about how do I put this together? Took me about a year of contemplation and then a year of creating it and skyrocketing it. And now we're on track to do millions of dollars of revenue in the next 12 months. And I've never felt so inspired by the people I'm working with, what I'm doing, the people who not just I'm working with on my team, but the people who are coming in. And so when you ask me what is that thing that makes things happen, I think it's urgency as much as it's acceptance. So if you don't have enough urgency, part of it might be your upbringing and what you learned, and that's fine, but you need to accept that about yourself. Part of it might be you're not pulled into your vision. Sometimes there's too much urgency. I see too many people like you see our friends who are coaches who like have 15 programs that come out in 12 months. It's because they're grabbing onto too many things. And it's like, well, that's too much urgency. You're grabbing onto too many things, spinning your wheels, and you're taxing your emotional labor out, and you're not gonna have bandwidth to like let the idea come in. So I've been very urgent when something's clear for me, and I've been very accepting and in a slow simmer when it's not. And I think that's why Wise Whisper Agency is doing so well, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, those are such incredible points. So I want to make sure everyone kind of understands the timeline as well, because I know it was in your 20s that you worked at the Pentagon. You took over for a colonel who was in his 60s, which was so impressive through what I just mentioned about contacting all those people and, getting that opportunity. Then people started asking you about how you got that position, and that turned into becoming a career expert in career coaching. And then I know you built out your $1,000 course, ended up making millions of dollars in a very short period of time, essentially losing it all. And then, like you said, taking 4 years to work privately with clients as you tried to get the clarity around what the next steps were. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm so impressed by your knowledge, and do you know what's a really fun fact is when my webinar was, like, crushing it and making so much money when I had a career coaching course in 2015, 16, I saw your ads, Emily, like, I saw you rising up, and my ads were booming like yours, and I guess we had no idea that that was the beginning of coaching. It almost felt like coaching was already trendy, but it was so the beginning of it really taking off for people.
Totally. And I know that you didn't know, what was going to come next, where you had that big boom, but then you ended up over $500,000 in debt. And I want to go into that because, as I shared with you on your podcast when you interviewed me, and how people have now heard on my podcast, I had a similar situation over the last few years. And so it's really on my heart to kind of understand how people move through challenge. But before we do that, I just want to touch on what you said around taking that 4 years to work privately with your clients, just a few clients per week. Like you said, that was kind of all you could give to that business. And then you were doing other things and living your life. And I remember in an episode I listened to with you, you said you felt held hostage by who you were, but you weren't yet clear on who you wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to hear, because we so often want to rush the process of the clarity. And sometimes we're not meant to know. Sometimes it takes longer than we want. And so I feel like for you to share that is such a beautiful like reflection and example of just take your time.
Yeah.
And to come back to that urgency piece, so many people are urgent from a place of lack, and they're not in a space of trust, and they don't believe that, everything's happening for them and that things will unfold as they're meant to. And so I think that that's a really important piece for people who might be in a similar situation to remember and to start to recognize in you and adopt for themselves, because we don't always need to rush things or be urgent, especially when it comes to that clarity.
Yeah, I think that clarity is a process. It's not an event. I mean, it's an event in the sense where it hits you when it wants to. But people, I don't know. There's something I learned when I went to University of Santa Monica's spiritual psychology program in like 2014. They, which doesn't exist anymore, but it used to, I guess, be a master's program for psychologists. And the thing they talked about the most was the dignity of process. And they would always say, never rob somebody the dignity of their process. And I think sometimes, especially as coaches and people that have this personality archetype, which is interesting because I don't really identify as a coach anymore as much as like a business owner for an agency, but we want to fix things because we're great at it and we want to help and we want to give advice. And we've been there and we've done that. And we're hoping to help and take people out of the pain that we've experienced. And there's a lot of beauty in that. I also have learned that there's a dignity to a process. I was just thinking about a friend today. She's going through a huge nightmare of being canceled online and all these really hard things. And there's so many things in her life. She's 6 years younger than me that I've seen coming. And I hate to, there's no ego in me being like, I saw that coming. That doesn't really feel fun for me. But there's so many times I've been like, hey, I've lost all my money with online marketing and you're doing the thing I was doing. You don't have as much runway as you think. You have to stop doing that. Make an investment here, do that. Or, hey, this business you're starting, I don't have a good feeling for you, but obviously you have to follow that, right? And obviously she would come back 3 years later and be like, yeah, I lost all my money doing that, And it's not like I'm always right, but the reality is you can't rob somebody the dignity of their process. It's like meeting a friend who's dating the wrong guy, which I've had way too much experience to admit in my own life too, where it's like you can see the writing on the wall. You're like, this is dead. This is not going to work out, especially because friends like are neutral observers, not just in love, but in life and in business. I think it's really powerful to ask your friends what they see in you. If you have good friends that want the best for you, who really get you, what a powerful thing to be able to collect feedback because the reality, and there's a lot of research to back that up, that your friends know if you're headed to divorce more than you do. It's in this book, The Science of Happily Ever After. It talks about how they have no skin in the game. So they're just watching two people and they just want your happiness, right? And so they're doing the math, watching two people. And so I value people's feedback and I respect the dignity of people's process as much as I can. And if I can get through to somebody and stop them, somebody that I love, I'm so here for that. But I've gone through my own pain and I've met it in the depths I have to meet it. And I think that that is so important for anybody listening to realize your career is going to be a process. Your choices are going to be a process. I never would have thought that I'm going to create an agency that's writing TEDx talks for people and getting them booked on stage for TEDx. That to me would have sounded so freaking random in 2010. And I thought I peaked. I thought I peaked when all my money was going away. I was like, shit, this was my big thing. And you talk about scarcity. And that's something I've really grappled with in business. Because I think the question for a lot of people is like, when are you in scarcity? And when are you being a smart business person? Because a lot of entrepreneurs have had people working for them that are like, hey, I want to do what you're doing. And it triggers a lot for entrepreneurs. They're like, oh, I feel scared. I feel invaded upon. Are they going to take what I've taught them and run away? Are you in scarcity? Because a lot of spiritual people will be like, I'm feeling a lot of scarcity. No, you're a businesswoman. You're protecting your assets, right? And so, yeah, we could look at the scarcity, but I think it's also really important to draw that line for yourself of where are you being scarce and where are you just being wise?
Totally. And I always ask myself, if I had $50 million in the bank, would I be making this decision? Because a lot of people are coming at different decisions, like you were saying with the example of putting 15 programs out from a place of, oh my gosh, well, what if this thing doesn't sell or that thing doesn't sell? And so it's all fear based decision making. But like you said, you can look at that example of getting the legal support or protecting your assets. Of course, even if you had tons of money in the bank, you would still protect your assets. So I think there's a way to ask questions and get to the root of why you're doing something. So you know whether you're in desire and you're in integrity, or are you in lack and scarcity and operating from a place of fear.
Yes, 100%.
And when you were in that period with the 500K in debt and rebuilding and that 4 year, not hiatus, but working with fewer clients and figuring out what the next steps were, what were some of the things that pulled you through? And did you have any mindset practices? Did you get any support during that time that made a big difference? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so much about support that I've learned. Everybody processes things differently, right? So I'm an ENFJ. I don't really identify with personality tests enough to put myself in a box, but I do know that I resonate with my archetype likes to talk out loud and then I make sense of things. It's through brainstorming, it's through getting feedback that I figure myself out. Other people, that is absolutely not the case. They go inward, they realize something, they come out. I think it's important to understand if you look at your past, how have you recovered from things? What was helpful for you? I don't always have a coach. I have one right now, a life coach. I really love her. But I've had a therapist for a very long time, and I think people's standards are too low for who they hire as a business owner and for personal things like coaches. And I sound like such an egomaniac, I feel like being like, "Your standards are too low." But what I will say is my team, the writers that are writing speeches for us right now for TEDx, I have never seen writing like what I'm seeing come through my speech writing house. The marketing director, the marketing team, I think she's a better marketer than me, and I've been in digital marketing for 15 years, and she's younger than me, she's less seasoned in her years of experience, but she's just a badass, and it's really up-leveled me into, like, my belief system of, "No, no, no, there is excellent talent out there." And so I had a therapist that was an entrepreneur, and she became a therapist in her 50s, and that just was, like, super profoundly helpful for me. I think I over relied on, like, healers or any sort of spiritual stuff. I love the spiritual stuff, but I think there's a tipping point where you're bypassing being on the ground, and it's not a time to figure out why this is happening. It's a time to look and get present with what's happening. I think a lot of people sometimes, including myself, have used spiritual resources as a way to check out of the actual present. They've also been supremely helpful. So I think that's the biggest thing I learned in my 20s was this is not time for a tarot card reading. Do you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes it is,
Yeah.
but being really mindful of whose insight you're taking in when you're tender. I think that's especially important with business, with love. You know, if I have an issue with my partner and I need help figuring it out, I'm very specific on which friends I'm going to go to for that.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And during that time, I know that you're obviously big on storytelling and the work that you're in requires, I'd imagine, a level of vulnerability from people who share their stories and get on those stages. How quick were you to share your financial loss and what you were going through?
Man, that's a really good question. I'm taking myself back to like, I think it was like 2017. My sister was an addict and she was literally on her deathbed. And I got the call from Amex that I wasn't going to clear my payment and that I needed a payment plan. And it was like $300,000 of ad spend. And I had a million points on American Express from ads in like just a few months, right? And everything happened so fast, I couldn't keep up with myself. Part of it was that I was checked out. I learned not to pay attention when things were too much, which I've really grown from. I just remember going through that era and thinking to myself, I need to surrender. Like, this has got to change. And remind me what your question was, because I had another thing that I wanted to say to answer that.
How quick were you to
Yeah.
share what you'd been through?
Yeah. I would say it wasn't until maybe immediately with my closest friends. I have about 4 or 5 girlfriends that I was like, "I'm in a nightmare." And they all commented, they're like, "Wow, you're like a Buddha in the storm. Like, you're such a Buddha." And I was like, "Wow, I guess this is a life moment where, like, my sister's dying and all my money is gone and I can't afford my apartment and I can't afford my car." And there's this weird okayness. I guess when you live your nightmare, you're kind of free because you're like, "Oh, wow, it's not actually that bad. I still got to wake up and have a nice conversation and a cup of coffee with my friend." And just and then obviously the nightmares come and all that stuff. But I would say immediately with all my friends and then a year later with just people in general.
Yeah, and that what you just said is so beautiful that when you live your nightmare, you're free. And I felt the same way and what I experienced. I have a similar Amex story, not that much money, but they basically threatened to sue me because I couldn't pay my bill. And I had a 6-week-old baby in my arms as I was served papers at my front door. That was such a humbling moment. And also, I was okay. I had a healthy daughter there. We were in this beautiful house. And yet, that had been my biggest fear. And my dad actually did go bankrupt in 2010 and has been rebuilding ever since. And so I saw that and was scared of going down that path. And so I totally know what you mean, though. And then there's so much freedom in actually starting to talk about it and recognize that you're also not the only one who has had that experience and been able to bounce back.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I would be curious if your urgency for success, because I saw you create it pretty fast as well. So it takes one to know one, takes one to see one. I wonder if your urgency comes from going through that with your dad too. You're like, we both had dads that lost all their money. It's like, okay, we better fucking get this together quick. We never want to feel this ever again. And sometimes when you move that fast, you miss things. It's like the early bird gets the worm, but what if you like broke your wing flying on over so quick? not paying attention to these things.
Totally. And when people tell me, my business went from nothing to seven figures in 18 months, and know yours was even faster than that. When people tell me they want to do that, I'm like, actually, I don't know if you do. And if
Yeah.
you do, there's definitely things that you need to think about that I was not taught. And I had a ton of mentors. I spent tons of money, but there were things I wasn't taught. And it's not their fault, but I just didn't know. And I didn't know to ask. And so, to your point, definitely I missed things and definitely would have done things differently, especially the last 5 years or so, had I been able to see that this was what was coming my way. But also, to your point, I had a friend message me the other day, and she's not in the exact situation, but something similar. And she's like, "What do I do?" And I was able to tell her exactly what to do, from what to do with all of her debt, who to contact, how to think about it. And I was just thinking, you know what? I've learned so much over the last 2 years. And that is a bit of a silver lining when it comes to this situation. And like you were saying, like reflecting back all of the lessons and how knowledgeable you are, sometimes you forget about what you've learned in the process.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's easy to forget when you're in pain. Like, pain is a really hard thing to be present with. And I think when we're in a lot of pain, our brain goes into the past to try to look at where you are right now and make sense of it. It goes into the future to look at options to get you out of the pain, right? If you're in debt, you're in pain, everything hits you, you're like, how can I get out of this over there, right? Or is there anybody from the past or anything from the past that can get me out of this? It's really hard to be present with, what do I do today? What do I do now? And I think that frenetic energy really influences our decision making in a way that's not helpful.
Totally. So I want to talk about Wise Whisper and everything you're doing now.
Yeah.
And what I heard you say on another podcast was that sometimes we misunderstand our skill set for a while. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, what have you uncovered is your true skill set and your passion with the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I think words has been my core skill set forever. I didn't know that. In my book U Turn, I talk about how I believe there's 10 core skill sets that largely exist in the workforce. Since I've written the book, I kind of think, oh, I could have turned that maybe into 12 and broken one up into two and all that kind of jazz. But it was my best shot at what I was seeing in my career coaching practice after 12 years of coaching people one on one. I probably coached more than three or 400 people. I would say Stephen Pressfield, I know we both know Stephen Pressfield's work. He talks about shadow careers. He talks about how a lot of people are in shadow careers. They look tantalizingly similar to what you want, but they're not it. It's the production assistant that actually wants to be an actor. It's the it's like the sidelines of what you actually want and you think you're getting closer to it. Sometimes you are, but a lot of times you're not. I think that a lot of people are stuck in shadow careers. That's the first thing. I think secondly, there's a big difference between what you're into and who you are. And that's the big message of my book, U Turn. Don't do what you love, do what you are. I am a very structured thinker. Like, I would be an excellent curriculum developer. I can take somebody's brain and put it into boxes and put it into order and like really make a story out of it and make sense of it and make it digestible. Really complex things, like I make sense of them for people. There's many ways I could use that skill set, right? I could be a curriculum developer, I could be a content creator. There's so much I could do. I also use words to connect with people. And that kind of connection was what made me want to join the CIA. It was like, I can use this in this way. So for years, I was sniffing around my core skill set. And there's many other core skill sets I talk about in my book. There's service. A lot of people are helpers. Coordination. A lot of people are crossing T's, dotting I's. Project managers, not my skill set, but words like I have, numbers, technology. I'm trying to think of some of the other core skill sets. I mean, the list really goes on. I have about 10 of them. But I would say, and they're in chapter 2, by the way, if anybody wants to read the book, U Turn. But I would say the biggest thing to know is what you love is the backdrop. So if you love sports, that's the backdrop of your career. But what you do is your skill set. That's the foreground. Too many people are thinking about the backdrop and making it the foreground. There's so many people when I graduated graduate school, they're like, I want to work for the government. I'm like, that's a pretty damn big place. Like, I want to work in national security. That's a really big section. Do you want to work in Afghanistan? Do you want to work in North Africa? Do you want to be a spy? Do you want to be a diplomat? Do you want to be a paper pusher, an analyst? What do you want? And so I think job hunting when you're young is so overwhelming, like becoming an adult, that we just say, get me somewhere in, I'm going to shoot for the stars and land somewhere in the sky. But the sky's a really big place. And so you want to make sure you're eating the right slice of the pie of what you want to do. The government's a big pie. Finance is a big pie. Sports is a big pie. Fashion is a big pie. Communications is a big pie. So figure out which slice you really want. And that comes back to your core skill set, what your gift is. There's a lot of research that backs when you're good at something, you have a better time. It's just common sense.
So tell us more about Wise Whisper and who you love working with and what the process looks like for people.
I love Wise Whisper. Okay, so we are an agency. There's 25 of us. We are a done for you service to write and book your TEDx talk. We advertise it as writing and booking your signature talk, but we've written and booked 100 TEDx talks. So that's pretty much our bread and butter. And we do it over 4 Zoom calls. It's pretty much done for you. Our creative director, who's on all the Zoom calls with the speechwriter, came from being Steve Jobs' assistant and doing speeches for his executive team. I'm bringing everything I learned from all the way back to Obama administration speechwriting. It's just wild how things stay with you. And we meet with clients over 4 Zoom calls, 90 minutes each. We get a really personal, emotional intake form from them, and that's their commitment. So writing a speech could take up to 80 hours for us. Booking you could take up to 200 hours, and we're completely done for you. So you just show up for those 4 calls. We pull your story, your magic out of you. Half of our clients are like, I've got a TEDx talk in me, but I don't know what it is. Half of them are like, I already know what it is, and then maybe it isn't. And we really do that creative direction for them and pull the message out of them and coach them and write for them. All of our writers have written New York Times bestselling books or movies that I watched when I was a kid. One of them was on something on Nickelodeon, I'm trying to remember. I think it was something with Hilary Duff, like maybe Lizzie McGuire. So just like really special writers that I get to connect with every single day and be inspired by. So yeah, we're really here for anybody that wants to amplify their authority, skyrocket their lead gen. And TEDx is such a brand asset. My second TEDx talk, it got almost 10 million views. It's in the top 100 on the TED channel. I mean, that thing didn't go viral for like a year. It just sat there. So they're truly brand assets. And I'm really proud of what we're doing. So I guess if anybody wants any more information, just head on over to wisewhisperagency.com. Let me know that you come from Emily so I can give you $1,000 off as long as it's within the first 90 days of the episode releasing.
Oh, that's so generous. Thank you.
Yeah.
And besides having like an inner knowing or even having a story ready to share, how would someone know they're ready for a TEDx talk? Is there a list of qualifications or a certain point of business or thought leadership that they should be at?
You know, you have to remember like the TEDx stage has a TEDx Kids. There's like high schoolers giving talks. So we really index for a few things. Number one is continuity. Is who you are on your LinkedIn profile related at all to who you're being in this TEDx talk? Because if you work at a tech startup, but you're doing a TEDx talk about energy healing, like it doesn't make sense. And that's really hard to book you. So we block that in our sales. Like we try not to take calls that we can't book people. I think everybody has something inside of them. I don't think everybody is a content creator. I don't think everybody wants more speaking opportunities. And I think there have been a couple clients that have come in over the past year out of the past like 50 of them where I'm like, ooh, are you sure you want more speaking engagements? Because we're writing a pretty good talk for you, but a lot of it is us doing the lifting. And then you're going to invite more energy towards you of this topic. No, I'm not looking for his business, as far as like, we'll be your crutch, like happy to be, where a lot of clients are coming back asking us to upgrade their 12-minute TEDx talk into a keynote. But those are some clients that I'm like, I wouldn't advise you to do a TEDx talk if you don't want more attention or more speaking engagements. Because I kind of think about those clients. I'm like, I don't think this is going to be fun for you when you get contacted to be on a stage other than this TEDx stage. So you want to have to really want to pull something out of yourself to say, and I do get feedback all the time from clients. They're like, wow, your intake form pulled stories out of me I didn't even know I had. And now they're like fundamental stories I'm using in my speaking career.
You're like, that's intentional. Love it.
Yeah.
So, do you consider yourself to be magnetic?
I guess, I get the feedback that I am. It feels really weird to own that. But I do think that there's this test called the Culture Index, and my friend Tracy Holland like lives by it. And she built $100 million company in 3 years off of hiring based on the culture index. So she gave me the test because we're just really good friends, and she said I'm in the 98th percentile for persuasion. So she's like, "You are a business builder. Anything you say, people are gonna hear, and the way you're saying it, they're gonna hear it, like, very well and want more." So that meant a lot to me to get that feedback from her. I do think that things happen when I talk, and there must be some magnetism there. And I guess my saving grace that I learned working in national security in an environment where if you pretend to know something you don't, somebody could literally die. I learned the limits of what I know. And so and to own those limits, right? So I know I'm pretty good at words and magnetism with them. I know I'm really bad at math and project management. Just knowing what you're great at and going all in on what you're awesome at.
So good. So before we close, I want to kind of close the loop because I'm thinking about this and I'm sure a lot of people are as well. So you mentioned that period of time where American Express came and said you have 300K on this card and your sister was literally on your deathbed. What
Yeah.
did you do?
I asked for a payment plan. I cried. I told all my friends. The debt collection industry, I'm sure you figured this out, is like the Wild West. I actually found this guy who helped me consolidate my debt, fix my credit card rating, negotiate me. I did a payment plan with American Express for I think 2 years. And then one day the payment plan was over. Maybe it was a year, I can't remember. It was over and suddenly instead of paying $3,000 a month towards the payment, like the actual amount, it was $3,000 a month of interest on the amount. And that was when I was like, I'm going underwater. Like I nothing even makes a dent in this lump sum. I'm just paying the interest now. And that was when I got a debt negotiator. And that was like the best thing I could have done. And he brought the amount down significantly. And I called a cousin who funded the amount that we negotiated and I paid him back over 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so, so powerful to hear that. I negotiated my own debt, which was really empowering. And
Wow. That's
yeah,
badass.
yeah, and I had a lawyer tell me my dad's lawyer was like, "You need to file for bankruptcy, like, you're never gonna get out of this," and I was like, "Just watch me. Don't tell me I can't do it."
Mhm. I love that.
Anyway, so, Ashley, before I ask the final question, where can people find you online if they're looking for more information about the agency or just you and your book and your work in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram at Ashley Stahl. My book is everywhere. Books are sold. U-turn, get unstuck, discover your direction, design your dream career is what it's called. And Wise Whisper Agency is poppin' at wiseWhisperAgency.com.
Love it. So, final question I ask all of our guests. What is one way that people can bust through all of their blocks and create a life that ends up being better than they could ever envisioned?
Being radically honest with themselves right now.
How do you do that?
I think you cannot be honest with yourself when you're really, really, really busy. You can't hear or think anything. I think that when you're cut off from yourself, you're disconnected from yourself. It's important to feel good first, to feel like yourself first. So make a list of people, places, things that make you feel like you and go put your time into those things and people. And when you start to feel more like you, you're going to start to feel where other things don't feel like you.
Thank you so much. Amazing. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for your honesty, for your vulnerability, for sharing so much of your story and your journey. It's been so supportive to me, selfishly, but also to all the listeners. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
One more thing before you go. I've created a dream life guide to support you if you're in a transition or just trying to get clear on what it is that you actually want. You have a feeling that you're meant for more, there's something else available for you. This guide will support you in getting that clarity and understanding any of the mindset blocks that may threaten to hold you back, and then get into action to the results that you are craving. So go to emilywilliams.com/guide to get this free guide today, plus a bonus walkthrough where I go through all of my framework and the steps that I take to support women just like you in creating their dream life. So go to emilywilliams.com/guide.